Welcome back, everyone. Today we will be reading Chapter 5, so let's get into it. Elliot frowned. The Lorien champion was a squat fellow, practically as wide as he was tall, and of some slightly different ethnic background from most of his compatriots. The Loriens were Vikings, basically. Thor types. Tall, long, blonde hair, big chins, big chests, big beards. But this character came in at about 5'6", with a shaved head and a fat, round Buddha face, like a soup dumpling, and a significant admixture of some Asiatic DNA. He was stripped to the waist, even though it was about 40 degrees out, and his latte-colored skin was oiled all over, or maybe he was just really sweaty. The champion's heavy, round gut hung down over his waistband, but he was still a pretty scary-looking bastard. He had a huge saddle of muscle across his upper back, and his biceps were like thighs. And there must have been some muscle in there, just by volume, even if they did look kind of chubby. His weapon was weird-looking enough, a polearm with a big curvy cross of sharp metal on the end, that you just knew he could do something really outstandingly dangerous with it. When he stepped forward, the Lorien army went nuts for him. They bashed their swords and shields together and looked at each other, as if to say, "Yes, he may look a little funny, but our fellow is definitely going to kill the other fellow's fellow, so 3 cheers for him, by Crom or whoever it is we worship." It almost made you like them, the Loriens. They were more multicultural than you would have thought, though there was no chance that their champion was actually going to kill the Felorian champion, Elliot's champion, because Elliot's champion was Elliot. There had been some debate, when the idea was first mooted, about whether it made sense to send the High King of Fillory into single combat with the hand-picked designated hitter of the invaded Lorien army. But it rapidly became clear that Elliot was set on it, though his reasons were as much personal as they were tactical. He had begun his stint as High King in a rather decadent vein, louche, you might even say. But as his reign lengthened, he had grown into the role and become more serious about it, and it was time he showed everybody, himself included, how serious he was. Kingship was not an affection. It was who he was, very publicly, very literally. He was going to put some skin in the game. He stepped forward from the front flank of his army, who predictably, but gratifyingly, also went nuts. Elliot smiled. His smile was twisted by his uneven jaw, but his happiness was the real stuff. His heart was in it. The sound of the king's regime of the Felorian army cheering was unlike anything else in the known universe. You had men and women shouting and banging their weapons together. Good enough. But then you had a whole orchestra of non-human sounds going on around it. At the top end, you had some fairies squeeing at supersonic pitches. Fairies thought all this military stuff was pretty silly, but they went along with it for the same reason that fairies ever did anything, namely, for the walls. Then you had bats squeaking, birds squawking, bears roaring, wolves howling, and anything with a horse head whinnying, pegasi, unicorns, regular talking horses. Griffins and hippogriffs squawked too, but lower, baritone squawking, a horrible noise. Minotaurs bellowed. Stuff with humans' heads yelled. Of all the mythical creatures of Fillory, they were the only ones who still creeped Elliot out. The satyrs and dryads and such were cool, but there were a couple of manticores and sphinxes who were just uncanny as hell. And so on, down the line, till you got to the bass notes, which were provided by the giants grunting and stomping their feet. It was silly, really. He could have picked a giant as his companion, and then this thing would have been over in about 10 seconds flat, pun intended. But that wouldn't have sent the same message. When Elliot first got the news that the Lorians were invading, it had been grimly exciting. Rally the banners! Fillory's at war! Antique formulas and protocols were invoked. A lot of serious-looking non-ceremonial armor and weapons and flags and tack had come out of the storage and been polished and sharpened and oiled. They brought up with them a lot of dust, too, and a thrilling smell of great deeds and legendary times. An epic smell. Elliot breathed it in deep. The invasion wasn't a complete surprise. The Lorians were always up to some kind of bad behavior in the books, kidnapping princes, forcing talking horses to plow fields, trying to get everybody to believe in their state of quasi-Norse gods. But it had been centuries since they actually crossed the border in force. They were usually too busy fighting amongst themselves to get that organized. More to the point, the peaks of the Northern Barrier Range were supposed to be enchanted to keep the Lorians out. That was the barrier's part. Elliot wasn't sure what had happened there. When this was all over, he'd have to remember to figure out exactly why those spells had crapped out. Elliot moved rapidly to expel the Lorians, though he found himself reluctant to be the direct cause of any actual killing. This wasn't Tolkien. These weren't orcs and trolls and giant spiders and whatever else. Evil creatures that you were free to commit genocide on without any complicated moral ramifications. Orcs didn't have wives and kids and backstories, but he was pretty sure the Lorians were human, and killing them would be basically murder, and that wasn't going to happen. Some of them were even kind of hot. And anyway, those Tolkien books were fiction, and Elliot, as High King Fillory, didn't deal in fiction. He was in the messy business of writing facts. It was a tricky, ticklish business. There was nothing in Elliot's admittedly limited experience more tedious than virtue. Fortunately, the Fillorians had an advantage, which was that they had every possible advantage. They outmatched the Lorians in every stat you could name. The Lorians were a bunch of guys with swords. The Fillorians were every beast in the monster manual, led by a clique of wizard kings and queens, and Elliot was very sorry, but you knew that when you invaded us. Still, there were a lot of them, and they knew how to do damage. Doing damage was pretty much these guys' skill set. It was late spring when the Lorians came pouring through Grudge Gap and onto Fillorian soil. They wore steel caps and mail shirts, and carried notched old swords and war axes. Some rode big shaggy horses. They were met by a nightmare. See, the Lorians had made a mistake. On their way down from the Northern Barrier Range, they set some trees on fire and an outlying farm, and they killed a hermit. Even Janet was surprised by Elliot's anger. I mean, she was furious, but she was Janet. She was pissed off all the time. Poppy and Josh looked grim, which was how they got angry. But Elliot's rage was crazy. Over the top. They burned trees? His trees? They killed a hermit? They killed a hermit? Where Fillory and the Fillorians were concerned, Elliot no longer had any irony. His heart went out to that weird, solitary man in his uncomfortable hut. He'd never met him. They would have had much to say to each other if they had. But whoever that hermit was, he obviously despised his fellow man, and that meant he was okay in Elliot's book. And now he was dead. Elliot was going to destroy the Lorians. He would annihilate them. He would murder them. Not murder, but he was going to mess them up good. He was tempted to let them try to cross the great northern marsh, where the sunken horrors that dwelt there would deal with them with extreme prejudice, but he didn't want to give them even another day's march on his grass. Besides, there were a couple more farms in the way. Instead, he let the Lorians march part of one day till noon, till they were hot and dusty and ready to knock off for lunch. Probably it was blowing their minds how easy it was all turning out to be. They were going to do it, lads. They were the ones. They were going to take fucking Fillory, dudes. He let them ford the great salt river. He met them on the other side. Elliot went alone, disguised as a peasant. He waited in the middle of the road. He didn't move. He let them notice him gradually. First, the guys in front, who, when they realized he wasn't going to get out of the way, called a halt. He waited while the guys behind those guys got crowded into them, soccer stadium style, and they called a halt, and all the way back down the line in a ripple effect. There must have been, he didn't know, maybe 1,000 of them. The man leading the front line stepped out to invite him, not very politely, to kindly get out of the way, or 1,000 Lorien linebackers would pull his guts out and strangle him with them. Elliot smiled, shuffled his feet humbly for a second, and then punched the guy in the face. It took the man by surprise. "Get the fuck out of my country, asshole," Elliot said. That one was on the level. No magic. He'd been taking boxing lessons, and he got the drop on the guy with an offhand jab. Probably the Lorien wasn't expecting what amounted to a suicide attack from some random peasant. Elliot knew he hadn't done much damage, and that he wouldn't get another shot, so he held up his left hand and force-pushed the man back so hard he brought 6 ranks of Loriens down with him. It felt good. Elliot had no children, but this must be what protecting your child felt like. He just wished Quentin could have seen it. He dropped the cloak and stood up straight in his royal raiment, so it was clear that he was a king and not a peasant. A couple of eager beaver arrows came arching over from back in the ranks, and he burned them up in flight. Puff, puff, puff. It was easy when you were this angry. And this, good and God, he was angry. And good. He tapped the butt of his staff once on the ground. Earthquake. All 1,000 Loriens fell down onto their stupid, violent asses in magnificent synchrony. He couldn't just do that at will. He'd been out here all last night setting up the spells, but it was a great effect, especially since the Loriens didn't know that. Elliot allowed it to sink in. Then he undid a spell. He made the army behind him visible, or most of it. Take a good look, gentlemen. Those ones with the horse bodies are the hippogriffs. The griffins have the lion bodies. It's easy to mix them up. Then, and he indulged himself here, he made the giants visible. You do not appreciate at all from fairy tales how unbelievably terrifying a giant is. These players were 7-story giants, and they did not mess around. In real life, humans didn't slay giants, because it was impossible. It would be like killing an apartment building with your bare hands. They were even stronger than they looked. Had to be, to beat the square cube law that made land organisms that big physically impossible in the real world, and their skin was half a foot thick. There were only a couple dozen giants in all of Fillory because even Fillory's hyperabundant ecosystem couldn't have fed more of them. 6 of them had come out of the battle. Nobody moved. Instead, the Great Salt River moved. It was right behind them. They just crossed it, and the nymphs took it out of its banks and straight into the mass of the Lorien army, like an aimable tsunami. A lot of the soldiers got washed away. He'd made the nymphs promise to drown as few of them as possible, though they were free to abuse them in any other way they choose. Some of the ones who weren't swept away wanted to fight anyway because they were just that valiant. Elliot supposed they must have had difficult childhoods or something like that. Join the club, he thought. It's not that exclusive. He and his friends gave them a difficult adulthood to go with it. It took them 4 days to harry the Loriens back to Grudge Gap. You could only kick their asses along so fast and no faster. That was where Elliot stopped and called out their champion. Now it was dawn, and the pass made a suitably desolate backdrop, with dizzyingly steep mountainsides ascending on either side, striped with spills of loose rock and runnels of meltwater. Above them loomed ice-bound peaks that had, as far as he knew, never been climbed, except by the dawn rays that were right now kissing them pink. Single combat, man to man. If Elliot won, the Loriens would go home and never come back. It was the deal. If the Lorien champion won, his name, for some reason, was Vile Father. Well, whatever. It wasn't like he was going to win. The lines were about 50 yards apart, and it was marvelously quiet out there between them. The pass could have been designed for this. The walls made a natural amphitheater. The ground was perfectly level, firm, packed, coarse gray sand, from which any rocks larger than a pebble had been removed overnight. Elliot kicked it around a little, like a batter setting into the batter's box. Vile Father didn't look like somebody waiting to begin the biggest fight of his life. He looked like somebody waiting for a bus. He hadn't adopted anything like a fighting stance. He just stood there, with his soft shoulders sloping and his gut sticking out. Weird. His hands were huge, like 2 king crabs. Though Elliot supposed he didn't look much less weird. He wasn't wearing armor either, just a floppy white silk shirt and leather pants. For weapons, he carried a long knife in his right hand and a short metal fighting stick in his left. He supposed it was pretty clear that he had no idea how to use either of them, apart from the obvious. He nodded to Vile Father. No response. Time passed. It was actually a teensy bit socially awkward. A soft, cold wind blew. Vile Father's brown nipples on the ends of his pendulous man cans were like dried figs. He had no scars at all on his smooth skin, which somehow was scarier than if he were all messed up. Then, Vile Father wasn't there anymore. It wasn't magic. He had some kind of crazy movement style that was like speed skating over solid ground. Just like that, he was halfway across the distance between them and thrusting his blade, whatever it was, straight at Elliot's Adam's apple at full extension. Elliot barely got out of the way in time. He shouldn't have been able to get out of the way at all. Like an idiot, he'd figured VF was going to swing the blade at him like a sword on the end of that long pole, thereby giving him plenty of time to see it coming. Which would have been stupid, but all right, I get it already. It's a thrusting weapon. By rights, it should have been sticking out of the nape of Elliot's neck by now, slick and shiny with clear fluid from the spine. But it wasn't. because Elliot was sporting a huge amount of invisible magical protection in the form of Fergus's spectral armory, which by itself would have saved his life even if the blade had hit home, but in itself would have. But in addition to that, he was sporting Fergus's a whole lot of other really useful combat spells, which had amped his strength up a few times over, and most important, had cranked his reflexes up by a factor of 10, and his perception a time down by that same factor. What? Look. Vile Father spent his whole life learning to kill people with a knife on a stick. Was that cheating? Well, while he was doing his squats and whatever else, Elliot had spent his whole life learning magic. When he and Janet had first finished up the casting a couple of hours earlier in the chilly pre-dawn, he'd been so covered in spellcraft that he glowed like a life-size neon sign of himself. But they'd managed to tamp that down so that the armor was only occasionally visible. Maybe once every couple of minutes, and only for a moment at a time, a flash of something translucent and mother of pearly. The trigger for the time and reflexes part of the enchantment system was Elliot twitching his nose. He did it now, and everything in the world abruptly slowed down. He leaned back and away from the slowly, gracefully thrusting blade, lost his balance, and put a hand down on the sand, rolled away, then got back to his feet while VF was still completing the motion. Though you didn't get to be as big and fat as Vile Father was without learning a thing or two along the way. He didn't look impressed or even surprised, just converted his momentum into a spin move, meant to catch Elliot in the stomach with the butt of the pole. I guess it doesn't pay to stand around looking all impressed on the battlefield. Though, Elliot was impressed. Watching it slowed down like this, you had to admire the man's athleticism. It was balletic, was what it was. Elliot watched the wooden staff slowly approaching his midriff, set himself, and all in good time, hammered down on it as hard as he could with his metal baton. The wood snapped cleanly about 3 feet from the end. Fergus, whoever you were, I heart you. VF, course corrected once again, reaching out with a free hand to snag the snapped-off bit while it spun in midair. Elliot batted it away before he could get to it, and he watched it drift off out of VF's reach, moving at a stately lunar velocity. Then, seeing as how he had some time to kill, he dropped the baton and slapped Vile Father's face with his open hand. Personal violence did not come naturally to Elliot. In fact, he found it distasteful. What could he say? He was a sensitive individual. Fate had blessed and cursed him with a tender heart. Plus, VF's cheek was really oily/sweaty. He wished he'd worn gloves or gauntlets even. He thought of that dead hermit and those burned trees, but even so, he pulled the punch. With his strength and his speed all jacked up like this, he had no idea how to calibrate the blow. For all he knew, he was going to take the guy's face off. He didn't, thank God, but Vile Father definitely felt it. In slow motion, you could see his jowls wrap halfway around his face. That would leave a mark. Emboldened, Elliot dropped the knife, too, moved in closer, and delivered a couple of quick body blows to Vile Father's ribcage. The hook, his instructor had told him, was his punch. Vile Father absorbed them and danced away to a safe distance to do more heavy breathing and reconsider his life choices. Elliot followed, jabbing and slapping both ways, left, right. My sister, my daughter, my sister, my daughter. His blood was up now. This was in every way his fight. He hadn't come looking for it, but by God, he was going to finish it. It was awfully calming, being sped up like this. It gave you time to think about things, to consider your own life choices. Mostly, Elliot was satisfied with the ones he'd made. He was in the right place. He was living his best life. How many other people in the multiverse could say that? He woke up every morning knowing what he wanted to do, and then he went and did it. And when he was done, he felt proud. He believed himself to be a good High King, and he had a lot of evidence to back it up. The people were happy. When it wasn't falling apart, Fillory was a good place. A great place. It took a substantial amount of malicious mismanagement to make Fillory a lousy place to live in, and nobody was going to get away with that on Elliot's watch ever again. Least of all, the Lorians. If he had a major fulfilled ambition, currently it related to Quentyn. It had been a year since Quentyn was dethroned and expelled from Fillory, and Julia had gone over to the far side. That had come as a shock to everybody, but to Elliot most of all, or second, after Quentyn anyway. The year since then had been peaceful and prosperous, and in some ways the mood was lighter in the castle with Josh and Poppy installed as king and queen in place of Quentyn and Julia, Fillory's broodsters in chief. But Elliot missed Quentyn. He wanted Quentyn by his side. For all his faults, Quentyn had been his best friend here, and really he'd just been coming into his own. That last adventure had been good for him. It had worn away the last of his adolescent self-consciousness, letting his better nature, his curiosity, his intelligence, his fanatical loyalty, his wounded heart show through. Fillory wasn't the same without him. Nobody loved Fillory the way Quentyn did, not even its High King. Nobody understood it like he did. Nobody enjoyed it like he did, and nobody could troubleshoot it like him when things went south. And Quentyn was missing out on so much. The passing of Martin Chatwin and the subsequent crisis of magic had given way to a glorious period in Fillory's history, a new golden age, unlike anything since the time of the Chatwins. It was an age of legends, of noble deeds and great wonders and high adventure, unfolding in a golden summer that went on and on and on. Already this year, Elliot and the others had ousted a great barbed dragon from a box canyon out in the Cock's Teeth and recovered 2 named blades from its hoard. They'd hunted a pair of 50-headed trolls through the darkling woods and forced them into the open and held them down and heard the sputtering crackle like ice cracking in a nice vodka tonic as they turned to stone in the morning sun. Elliot had brought back a bristling, spitting black troll cat for a pet. Quentyn would have loved that. Frankly, Elliot worried about him. Quentyn was perfectly capable of taking care of himself, except when he wasn't. He was fine when he was on an even keel, but last time Elliot saw him, his keel was looking distinctly wobbly. Elliot had been scheming away to get Quentyn back to Fillory ever since the day he was banished, but he hadn't gotten very far. It was in the back of his mind that maybe if he defeated Vile Father, thereby saving the realm, Ember might give him a reward. He would ask Ember to pardon Quentyn. It was half the reason he'd set up this duel in the first place. Speaking of whom, Vile Father was moving in again, still without much expression on his stolid, hoggy face. Elliot felt as though he ought to be inspiring a little more terror in his adversary, but whatever. He flipped time to normal speed for just a second, coming up for air. Vile Father was whirling his abbreviated polearm in a tricky cloverleaf pattern. Much good may it do him. Elliot slow-mowed again, ducking under it, working around it, pounding the man's body like a heavy bag, trying to knock the wind out of him. He ought to have been more careful. Elliot had underestimated how much punishment Vilefather could take, or maybe he'd overestimated how much he was giving out. He definitely underestimated how quickly VF could move even relative to Elliot's massively accelerated time frame, and how completely VF had sized up his overconfident, inexperienced opponent. Even as he sucked up a hail of body shots, Vilefather barged into Elliot and managed to get his arms around him. Never mind, Elliot would just slip out. You'd think you could just... But no, it was harder than he thought. A moment's hesitation had cost him. Vilefather's smooth baby face and yellow teeth and beefy breath were right up next to him now, and those ham-hock arms were starting to squeeze and crush. VF had evidently assessed the situation and decided that it didn't matter how fast your opponent could move when he couldn't move a muscle. So you took whatever damage you had to get the other guy in a bear hug. He had, and now he was trying, slowly but strangely unstoppably, to crush the life out of Elliot, and also to get his teeth into Elliot's ear. Enough. This guy was strong, and he had all the leverage, but he wasn't superhuman. Elliot felt like he was practically encased in Vilefather at this point, and he hadn't taken a proper breath in about 30 seconds. He began to pry himself free. It was still a lot harder than you'd think. He had no leverage whatsoever, and Vilefather was not at all kidding about his personal vileness. But Elliot slither-wrenched his way out of Vilefather's arms and staggered a few feet away. He was still getting his balance when he felt something poke him painfully behind one shoulder. He arched his back away from that fiery hot point and shouted, "Ah!" Nothing the Lorian was carrying should have been able to get through spectral armor. He spun away, still ahead of Vilefather, but not nearly as far ahead as he expected. In real life, both their movements must have been a blur. This guy was running magic weaponry. Elliot should have looked at the blade on that thing more closely. It must be Felorian metal, magic metal. I bet he took it from that hermit, Elliot thought. I bet that thing's made of a Felorian plow blade. Oh, that is it, Elliot snapped. On his feet again, he spun around the blade and grabbed what was left of the weapon shaft and wrenched it out of Vilefather's hands. That took some skin with it, he thought. Good. He threw it as hard as he could, as hard as Fergus could. It was still rising when it disappeared into the low-hanging cloud around the mountain peak. He skipped back and set himself the way his boxing instructor told him to. Then he shuffled forward. The boxing thing was mostly just for the aerobics. Plus, it was an excuse to enjoy the company of the boxing instructor, whose amazing upper body was enough to make Elliot not miss internet porn in the slightest. But it had some practical value, too. Jab, jab, cross. Hook, hook. He was snapping it out crisp and firm, no more holding back. He was rocking Vilefather back on his heels now. Elliot found he was baring his teeth and spitting words with each punch. "You killed a hermit, you weird, sweaty bastard." "Don't go down, cocksucker. Don't go down. I want to hit you some more." They were practically back against the Lorian front line when Elliot kicked Vilefather in the balls, and then, indulging a personal fantasy, he swept the leg and watched Vilefather rotate clockwise in a stately fashion and simultaneously descend until he crashed, thunderously, and with a lot of slow-motion blubbery rippling onto the packed sand. Even then, he started to get up. Elliot kicked him in the face. He was through with these fucking people. My kingdom, my country, mine. He dropped all the magic at once. The strength, the speed, the armor, all of it. Go. Well, not all of it. His amplified voice echoed off the stone walls of the pass like thunder. He picked up the broken end of Vilefather's weapon and threw it into the sand. Fortunately for his sense of theater, it stuck there upright. Go. Let this shattered spear mark the border between our lands. If any man cross it, or woman, I make no guarantee of their safety. Fillory's mercy is great, but her memory is long and her vengeance terrible. Not exactly Shakespeare. You mess with the ram, he said. You get the horns. Better leave it at that. Elliot scowled a terrible royal scowl at the Lorien host and turned and walked away. Speaking a charm under his breath, he was rewarded with a soft rustle and creak of the little stub of wood growing into an ash tree behind his back. A bit of a cliché, but hey, there are clichés for a reason. Elliot kept walking. His breathing was going back to normal. He'd done it. He'd shown the world that when it came right down to it, the High King would put everything on the line. The pass ran north to south. High King, and the sun was finally cracking its eastern rim, having already been busy lighting the rest of Fillory for at least an hour now. The ranks parted to let him go through. God, he loved being a king sometimes. There wasn't much better in life than having your own ranks part before you, especially after you'd just delivered a bona fide public ass-kicking to somebody who deserved it. He avoided eye contact with the rank and file, though he did point two fingers at the most senior of the giants, acknowledging that he'd done the High King a personal favor by showing up. I owe you, man. The giant inclined his huge head toward Elliot gravely. Their kind played a deep game. It was a funny feeling, coming back to real time after having watched the world in slow motion for half an hour. Everything looked wildly accelerated. Plants waving, clouds moving, people talking. It was a beautiful, clear morning. The air and icy coolant washing across his overheated brain. He decided he would just keep on walking. He would walk the whole mile back to the Fillorian encampment by himself. Why the hell not? A lot of people tried to fuss at him about the punctured shoulder, which was probably still leaking some blood, and now that the excitement was wearing off, it had started to sting pretty furiously. But he didn't want to be fussed over, not quite yet, all in good time. The war with Loria was over. Life was good. It was funny how just when you thought you knew yourself through and through, you stumbled on a new kind of strength, a fresh reserve of power inside you that you never knew you had. And all at once you found yourself burning a little brighter and hotter than you ever had before. Elliot thought Quentin would have understood. "Honey, I'm home." He threw open the tent flap. "Keep saying that." Janet didn't look up. One day it might grow up to be funny. Janet was bent over a big trestle table, covered with the enormous maps of Fillorian terrain that they'd used to keep track of their brief but glorious anti-Lorien campaign. They were littered with miniature figurines. Elliot had had them made up especially to represent both sides of the action. Not strictly necessary, since there were only two armies, and only one front. It wasn't exactly Axis and Allies here. But they'd had a lot of fun pushing them around the maps with long-handled wood paddles. The tent was full of pink light, strained through its red silk walls. Elliot dropped into an armchair. It was hot in the tent, even at this altitude. Fillorian seasons were irregular and unpredictable, and they'd been on a streak of summer months for he didn't know how long now. It had been rather splendid at first, but it was getting to be a bit much. "Did you take care of our daddy issues?" "I did," Elliot said. "My hero." She came around the table and kissed him on the cheek. "Did you kill him?" "I did not kill him. Knocked his ass out, though." I would have killed him. Well, next time you can go. I will. But there won't be a next time. Sad face. Janet sat down in the other armchair. In anticipation of your inevitable victory, I summoned a couple of Pegasi to take us back to Whitespire. They'll be here in a few minutes. Want to see my war wound? Show. Elliot swiveled around as far as he could without getting up, far enough that she could see the divot Vile Father had gouged out of his deltoid, or trapeus, or whatever that muscle was. Nice, she said. It's ruining the upholstery on that chair. That's it? It's ruining the upholstery? I would ask if you wanted a medal, but I already know you want a medal. And I shall have one. Elliot closed his eyes, suddenly weary even though it was only 9:30 in the morning. The rush was gone, and he was shaking a little. He kept having flashbacks to Vile Father pressed up in his grill, crushing his rib cage. I'll give it to myself. Maybe I'll start an order. The Order of the Broken Spear, or it will be for people who are exceptionally valiant like me. Congratulations. Are you okay to fly? Yes, I'm okay to fly. He and Janet talked like this all the time. The Florians didn't really get it. They thought High King Elliot and Queen Janet hated each other. But the truth was that in Quentin's absence, Janet had become his principal confidant. Elliot supposed it was partly because they both found real romantic intimacy elusive and kind of uninteresting. So usually, neither of them had a serious boyfriend, and they had to turn to each other for intelligent companionship. Elliot used to worry that his lack of a long-term partner meant that he was physiologically or psychologically unhealthy, emotionally arrested maybe, or commitment phobic or something. But he worried about that less and less. He didn't feel arrested or phobic. He just felt like being single. Not like Josh and Poppy. 6 weeks after they took the thrones, they were a couple, and after 6 months, they were engaged. No one saw it coming. But now looking back, it was hard to remember that they'd ever been apart. Elliot wondered if it was the crowns themselves, if there was some kind of ancient magic at work that caused any royals who weren't actually related to couple up and produce heirs to the thrones. Having exhausted itself trying and failing to shove Elliot and Janet together, the spell had turned its attention to Josh and Poppy, and had more luck. Maybe it was true, but Josh and Poppy really did seem to love each other. Elliot thought it spoke well of Poppy that she saw the point of Josh, which not everybody could. He wasn't handsome, and although he was as clever as any of them, he didn't walk around making sure everybody knew it all the time. No, the point of Josh was that he had a big and noble heart. It had taken Elliot literally years to figure that out. Poppy was a quicker study. Now the two of them were thoroughly nested, and a week ago they'd told him that Poppy was pregnant. It wasn't public yet, but she was starting to show. The people would love it. There hadn't been a prince or a princess in Fillory in centuries. It made Elliot feel a little alone and a little empty, but only a little. Life was long. Plenty of time for that stuff, if he ever found himself wanting it. He was High King in a great age. His business right now was logging some great deeds. He heard the thump of hooves on the grass, and a stiff wingtip brushed the coarse silk wall by his head. The Pegasi were here. He opened his eyes and heaved himself up. He was pretty sure the wound had stopped bleeding, though he could feel where his shirt was stuck to it. Quentin had been shot with an arrow there once. They'd fixed him up back at Whitespire. He would have them leave a nice scar. Without waiting for Janet, he put on his king face and strolled outside. The Pegasi were trotting around on the cold grass, circling each other relentlessly. their tremendous white eagle wings still half extended. They hated to keep still, Pegasi. Marvelous beasts they were, pure white and light as air, though they looked as solid as any regular horse, with thick muscles and squiggly blue veins standing out beneath the skin, like power cords under a rug. Their silver, platinum? Shiny anyway, hooves flashed in the morning sun. They stopped pacing and stared at him expectantly. They could speak, but they hardly ever deigned to, not to humans, not even to the High King. "Janet," he called. "Coming." "Just leave your stuff. They'll pack it for you." "True." She exited the tent a moment later, empty-handed. She'd changed into Jodhpurs. "You know, I had a thought," she said. "With the army all mobilized like this, why don't we take advantage of the momentum? Keep on pushing them back and take Loria." "Take Loria?" "Right. Then we bring the whole army to the Netherlands and march it through the fountain and take Earth, right? It would be so easy." "Sometimes," Elliot said, "I find it so hard to know when you're joking. I have the same problem." The Pegasi seemed even more reluctant than usual to remain earthbound. They barely stayed still long enough for Elliot and Janet to mount. Pegasi wouldn't wear saddles, so you just hung on to their manes or necks or feathers or whatever you could get a hold of. Elliot felt thick muscles playing under skin as the beast pumped its way up into the air. They spiraled higher and higher, and his ears popped, and the camp shrank below them. He saw the pass where he'd fought Vile Father, the Felorian host still formed up into crisp lines. The Lorians straggling away back home. When they were maybe 1,000 feet up, the Pegasi leveled off and turned southeast for Whitespire. Elliot loved Fillory at all times, but never more so than when he saw it from the air. When the land rolled out beneath you like a map in a beloved book that you'd spent your whole childhood gazing at, studying, wishing you could fall into, feeling like you could. And Elliot had fallen. From here, he could see the old stone walls that crisscrossed Fillory, built by hands unknown, for no known reason. It made the green landscape look quilted. In some places, the walls had been broken and scattered by weather or animals or people who needed the stones for more immediate and practical purposes. Dark green hedges followed the main roads for miles. Neat double lines from here, but as thick and daunting as Norman hedgerows when you got up close to them. He made a couple of mental notes of where they were getting a bit unruly. He would notify the master of hedge. They charged on and up into White Cloud, and Fillory vanished. Clouds in Fillory weren't clammy and disappointing the way they were in the real world. They brushed past you all warm and soft and cottony, just solid enough to be comforting. Fuck love. Fuck marriage. Fuck children. Fuck fucking itself. This was his romance. This fantasy land at whose helm he sat, steering it on and on into the future, world without end, until he died and tastefully idealized statues were made of him. It was all he needed. It was all he would ever need. When they emerged from the clouds, they were over the great northern marsh. Bad shit down there, he knew. In fact, the water was disturbed over a wide area as the mottled back of some vast living mass sank from view into the black bogs. Maybe one day, if he ever got that bored, he would lead an expedition in there and see what was what. Then again, maybe he wouldn't. He stared down into the marsh for a long time, lost in thought, and when he looked up, he found that they were no longer two, but three. Ember had joined them, in between him and Janet, flying in formation. It had been some time since he'd had an audience with the god. "High King," the ram said, "I would have words with you." Ember's deep bass voice was clearly audible even over the rushings of the wind. He had no wings, and he didn't even bother to gallop, though occasionally the air ruffled his tight, woolly curls. He just flew along in between them, stiff ram legs tucked up under him, like he was sitting on an invisible flying carpet. "Hi," Elliot called out. "I'm listening." "You have won a great victory for Fillory today." "I know. Thanks." Maybe this was the time to bring up Quentin, but Ember went on. "But this is only one battle. A war is beginning. Elliot, a war we cannot win. The last war." "What? Wait, I don't understand. What does that mean?" This wasn't the speech Elliot was expecting. He was expecting the one where Ember praised him to the skies, showered him with fatherly approval, granted him a boon. "What war are you watching?" Janet shouted. "We crushed those guys. Elliot crushed them. It's over." "Have you not wondered how it is that the Lorians could have crossed the northern barrier into Fillory?" "Well, yeah," Elliot admitted. "A little." "The old spells have weakened. This invasion was merely a portent, foretold long ago. The war we are losing is with time." "Oh," Elliot said. "Okay." Was it a war with time? He vaguely remembered something like this in the books, but it had been a long time since he read them, and even then he hadn't read them too closely. Once again, he wished Quentin were here. "The end is almost here, Elliot," Ember said. "The end of what?" "Of everything," Ember said. "Of this land, this world. Fillory is dying." "What? Oh, come on!" That was ridiculous. A cheap shot at best. Fillory wasn't dying. Fillory was kicking ass right now. Time of legends. World without end. "What are you talking about?" Ember didn't reply. Instead, the Pegasus spoke up for the first time. Elliot had never heard one speak before. "Oh no," it said. It gave a horsey sigh. "Not again." That's it for this week. We'll see you guys next week with Chapter 6.